Madam Secretary, you're here in Grenada for the Sustainable Tourism Conference.
Yes.
Your thoughts on CTO mounting this exercise here with Pure Grenada? How important is it from your perspective?
The Caribbean has to become the leader in the conversation about sustainable and responsible tourism. So for the CTO to take the lead to have this sustainability conference, and the first one being held since COVID, tells us that coming out of COVID, we really have to pivot in terms of how we have approached selling the tourism sector, selling the Caribbean, and really trying to focus on how do we create a sector that is not only sustainable but resilient, but also ensures that all of the partners who have inputs into that sector have a place at the table. So this is what this conference is about, bringing together all of those partners, whether they be persons within the hotel sector, the people who we traditionally look at people in the hotel sector, or we're talking about the partners who have inputs, the agricultural sector, fisheries, the ancillary service providers, government, NGOs, private sector, all of these persons who have a part to play in ensuring that the sector is successful. These conferences give us the opportunity to dialogue with one another, for us to lay out what our challenges are on the table and to see if it is we can find workable solutions that we can implement across the region and ensure that those solutions are solutions that are permanent.
Are you confident that stakeholders Caribbean-wide really understand the true impact of the tourism sector as you go from destination to destination?
What I can tell you in terms of my personal observations is that immediately while we were in the midst of the COVID pandemic, people recognized how important tourism was because everyone's borders were closed and everyone realized that that tourist dollar doesn't necessarily stay in the pocket of someone who works in the sector, but that person is going to a grocery, that person is paying medical bills, that person is paying school fees for their children, that person is sending money to take care of somebody somewhere else. So people now, I think, got an understanding of how important the sector is. However, I think that 2 years down the road, 3 years down the road, we probably are in danger of going back to the attitudes that pervaded before the COVID pandemic. And I think that it's important for us to constantly remind ourselves of the opportunity that was created in the chaos of that. It allowed us to be able to put certain standards and policies in place when it comes to managing the sector from a health standpoint. But in addition to that, there was a unity of purpose that resulted from us collectively getting together and collectively coming around the table and saying, you know what, we can't compete as a Grenada, as a Tobago, as a Jamaica, as a Barbados, but we have to look at, you know, collaboration as a region because our competition lies outside of our borders. And because we are the most vulnerable region when it comes to the shocks of what can happen to our tourism sector and how much those impacts have on the average person within our countries, it's very, very important that we don't forget the lessons that we learned. And in going forward in terms of planning, that we take those lessons into account so that we can future-proof ourselves in case of another disaster.
In terms of shocks and disasters,
Yes.
You recently had an oil spill off the shores of Tobago. How are things going in terms of the recovery?
We are still cleaning up at this time. The majority of the oil that spilled in the first couple of weeks has been cleaned from the immediate shoreline that was impacted. We had some oil getting into our sensitive wetland areas that is being treated with at this time. The biggest operation that is set to take place is the salvage operation. That is the one that is going to be kind of complex, and that is going to take us into a next couple of weeks, possibly into a few months, because there's a lot of technical planning that has to go into that salvage operation. But so far we still have the support of the stakeholders on the ground. We still have cleanup crews working every day to make sure that in places where the oil did not impact, that those places continue to remain pristine, and for the areas that were impacted, the cleanup crews continue to do their work diligently. So it is our hope that within the space of about 2 months or so, we should have this disaster behind us.
What's the message to the marketplace as it relates to travel to Tobago?
The message to the marketplace is that Tobago is open for business, and we have remained open for business. And despite the fact that we had this setback and we have put things in place to manage that in the areas that have been impacted, the rest of Tobago is still welcoming visitors, so you can still come to our beaches on the southwest, you can go to beaches in the north, you still have our pristine, oldest protected rainforest in the Western Hemisphere with all its diverse flora and fauna. We still have our festivals and cultural events going on. So Tobago is very open for business, very ready to welcome our travelers. We have our Heritage Festival coming up in July. We also, our plans are on the way for our 3rd annual Tobago Carnival in October. So once you have time to run away to the greatest little island on the planet, we are here waiting with open arms.
Your one takeaway from this conference, listening to all of the presentations, the Prime Minister this morning, the Executive Chairman from Sandals, what is your takeaway leaving Grenada in terms of the insight that has been shared?
My biggest takeaway so far is that out of all the 5 P's, the first P is the most important, which is people. If we don't have people, we don't have a sector, and one of the things that Mr. Stewart said in his remarks is that we have to become very intentional about what we're doing. And the Prime Minister also said that, because in the beginning he asked who was in the room, and then he realized that maybe some persons were maybe missing, and that kind of brought it home to us that we may sit in our beautiful restaurants, beautiful beaches, beautiful hotels, beautiful bars, and think that the tourism sector may revolve around us. But the reality is that there are a number of persons that make the sector successful, and it's important for us to have those partnerships solidified. So we have to start with people. We have to become more inclusive. We have to redefine that term inclusive, and that is Tobago's neutral tourism strategy, redefining all inclusive. How do we look at a model that not just looks at comfort and luxury and all the things that have been associated with an all-inclusive model, but rather a people-inclusive model, and making that term more inclusive of the relationships and the partnerships that we want to build with each other.